And with a challenge like this, you're going to produce some garbage. It's going to be there.
The Energy Spark Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Energy Spark Podcast, where we aim to inform and inspire in all ways related to the energy transition. My name is Gijs.
My name is Jim.
And today we are joined by the esteemed Willem Klok. Willem is a PhD candidate at the Technical University of Eindhoven with a specialization in sustainable finance. He has published 3 academic papers, is part of the New Energy Outlook for the Netherlands group, and has written over 100 articles on his blog, I just counted it, at willemklok.com. And most importantly, he was a long-time Team Energy alumni. Welcome, Willem Klok.
Yes, thank you very much.
How are you?
I'm good. I do have to correct you, though. I don't have 3 papers published. I have 1 published and 2 are in the process of being published.
Okay.
Unfortunately, doesn't go that fast in
Yeah,
academia, but...
Still very impressive.
Thank you.
You're doing your PhD now.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. So maybe the runner-up is also interesting because I came from mechanical engineering, actually.
Right.
So a very different department from where I am now. And I think, so even I started at Fontes, so University of Applied Sciences, and there I kind of got the affinity for sustainability. And that's why I decided to do the master's here, so the Sustainable Energy Technology Master. And there I realized that on the technical side, we're actually doing quite good with sustainability. I mean, we got it kind of figured out how we can do it. We just have to get the wind turbines up and the solar panels running. So that's why in the master's, I specialized in the Innovation Sciences group, which is more on the social aspect of things. And in my master thesis there, I looked at how people are, or the acceptance of wind energy, kind of what limits it, why is it such a big thing, especially in the Netherlands, of course, we have a lot of protests and stuff going on against new wind parks, and it seems to go very slow, the installed capacity of onshore wind. So I was curious about like what happens there, why is it not going the way it should go? After that, I thought, okay, now I also have a bit of an understanding of how the social part works, but I think the financial part is also very interesting because if there's no finance for something, it just doesn't happen. That's just the way the world works right now. If there's no finance, it doesn't happen. So I was curious to explore kind of what happens in that system with sustainability, if anything at all, and whether that's actually helping us or if it's just, how do you say, window washing? No. That it just window dressing, I think, is the word. That it just seems like a lot of stuff's happening, but actually behind the scenes, it's not really changing anything. So that's what got me interested in finance. Fortunately for me, I did my graduation project in the NEON project, which is the New Energy Outlook for Energy and Mobility in the Netherlands, if I recall correctly. And within that project, they still had a position, but they didn't have a specific assignment or a specific task that needed to be filled. So I was very free to choose what I wanted to do. And that's why I fortunately got the freedom to kind of pick my own topic. And that's why I decided to go with finance, which, as you might also know, is not a very big thing in our university. I mean, we have finance on more the corporate level, but not necessarily on a very broad, more systems level. So that's what I set out to do. And within the PhD, that's actually exactly what I'm doing. So I'm looking at what's happening in the financial system with respect to sustainability. And if we kind of extrapolate these trends, are we going to get anywhere near the financing needs that we have? Because there's a lot of shortage in both climate change mitigation and adaptation, especially in developing countries. This is even more pronounced. And there also the gap is growing because investors are becoming a bit more risk averse and kind of retaining their investments to more developed economies. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm looking at finance really from the transitions perspective, that's of course a thing in our university, the whole transitions and the MLP and all the related frameworks. But usually in our university, we apply this on technological issues. So we look at the energy system and we try to see what's happening as in a transition in the energy system or the mobility system or agriculture, for example. And these are all systems where technology has a very big role. And in finance, that's not necessarily the driving force of change. It's more about culture, about people, about behavior. Yeah. So that was also the interesting kind of added value in that sense to apply these, or to see if I can apply these frameworks also to a non-technical system, so to say.
Right. And how is that going? How, like, does it translate well to this financial system, or are you noticing?
I think it does. I mean, I did find some interesting things that I think you don't see too much if you just look at the system as a whole without kind of decomposing it with how we do with the MLP, for example, to kind of see the interaction between the pressures from above and kind of what's growing underneath and how these things compete with each other. I think I think with these frameworks you can kind of get a clearer view of things, what's happening. It's not just a big mess that's happening and something comes out of it. It's more of a process that you can see how it gets to where it's going.
What kind of, you mentioned like there's like the regime from above and then the thing is kind of bubbling up. Can you concretely name some of these things that are happening that maybe we are not seeing because we're not applying these frameworks?
Yeah, so the biggest thing is, so you have just the landscape is as it is, and then you have the financial regime, which I would classify as the modern capitalist regime. That's kind of how you could name it in how it's behaving right now. And below that, in the niche domain, you have sustainable finance, which is a very big thing. And there's a lot of stuff happening in sustainable finance, a lot of literature, a lot of research. But if you look closer, you actually see that there is, even within that sustainable finance, there are some different directions you can go. And the two that I identify in my research are, you have very financially driven sustainable finance. And that's the group where you have investors that say, I don't invest in coal because coal is too risky because of transition risks.
Yes.
I don't do that anymore. Or I do invest in electric vehicles because these are the future and there's a lot of profit to gain there. They're doing something sustainable, but the motivation is still financial. And that's a very different one from what you also see, but to a much lesser extent, people that say, I don't invest in coal because I don't want to contribute to climate change. That's a very different motivation. It has the same outcome, but it's a very different type of sustainable finance, I would say. The first one is very big, and it's also what's been promoted most in policy, I would say. Also in research, it's mostly focusing on like uncovering what kind of environmental thing is a very good indicator for financial profit, like trying to find these kind of correlations there. And it's not so much focused on the other side, which I think is much more interesting.
Why do you think it's more interesting?
So when you look at it from a transitions perspective, the first that I describe is very conformative. It keeps the goal of the system as it is. The rules don't change that much. You kind of add something to it. You kind of add a sustainability constraint, or you don't change the system as a whole. It stays the same. And the other one, you have a new system goal. So besides trying to get a financial return, there's also something else you get. And this thing is still very vague. I think in the literature, they sometimes describe it as emotional return or expressive return. So emotional return in that context is just that you feel good by doing something, similar to how you feel good for helping someone in some examples. And the expressive one is really the added benefit of doing something that's in line with what you stand for. It's not really emotional. It's a bit of a different one, but it's also kind of in the same domain, I would say. But so you create a new goal for the system, and that's very, from a transitions point of view, that's super transformative because the system goal is basically the highest that you can get. And changing that, I think, that can have a real impact on the system and how it behaves, and especially in relation to sustainability. Because in the former case, so where everything has to be financially viable, you need to price every externality. Everything needs to be calculated. Everything needs to be enforced. And especially because we have a global financial system, you need to do that on a global scale. So if you have a tax in the Netherlands on something, then investors just move somewhere else. It's very hard to make the system sustainable in that way because you have to do it everywhere. And there are so many loopholes and things investors can go through to still get what they want, which is the financial return. That as long as that remains the primary and only objective, I think it's very hard to make the system sustainable in that sense.
And do you see the system changing in that way fundamentally? Do you see a trend of leaning more and more, the system leaning more and more to this expressive kind of based?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I think so. So the financially driven one, as I said, is most supported with policy and in research as well. But on the other hand, you see the other one also grow, as in, for example, more people are joining a green investment bank or a green bank than a conventional bank, which the interest rate is not that much different. It's even lower usually for the greener banks. So you do see some increasing appetite for that kind of emotional, expressive benefit that they are offering. But it's interesting because we're not doing anything for that. We're not promoting that at all. There's no policies that kind of stimulate investors to do that, which I think is also why it's a very interesting area to look at more, because I think there's a lot to win there because we're not doing anything there and still it's growing.
Yes. So since right now we're as I would say a global society, we're in this modern capitalistic system, as you named it, I think. And this is the only system that you can see that it works, right? Like capitalism works. It's, of course, it's not perfect. It's very dirty, but it works. It pulls people out of poverty.
Yeah, it
and
does so, yeah.
currently we let's say you put net zero 2050 as a target. Do you think it is realistic that a radical change, as you're describing it, will occur or can add substantial value to what is happening right now?
I think it's hard to say. I mean, that's also what I'm doing in my research. I'm not saying that the other way is we should put all our money on that side and that's what we should go for. I'm only saying that that's transformative. And because there are so many inherent contradictions to sustainability and modern capitalist finance, we need something transformative to be able to make that work. And I'm not saying this is the way. I'm just saying that it's something that's already happening and that there is potential for this transformation. But I think in reality, we probably need both. If we're going to wait for investors to change how they look at the world, I think we're going to have a hard time to make that work. So we definitely need both. But I think we're only doing one of them without stimulating the other at all. And I think that's where we could improve a little bit.
Ironically, it kind of feels like a gap in the market because there's like you said, there's no push for this sort of behavior, but yet it's happening, which is, I guess, some proof that it's intrinsic.
Yeah, definitely.
Which
definitely.
means there's interest, right?
Exactly. And also a lot of it does not anymore come at a green premium or a greenium, as I've seen you name it. So there's not really a financial, maybe there's not necessarily a financial incentive, but neither is there a financial barrier to make this step. It's just
no, exactly.
People have a good feeling with it, and they have the ability to make this change without that it negatively impacts them.
Yeah. And I think the big thing that's maybe under this whole story is kind of the financial system as it has grown. It's very much apart from the real world. If you're in an environment where you make investments, a lot of the time you see a lot of abbreviations of companies with some numbers. Like it doesn't speak to your imagination at all. You don't know what you're investing in. It doesn't have any real world association. And the financial system has grown very much apart that a lot of investors don't know what exactly they're investing in. They have like this ETF, which has like a 1,000 companies in them. And I think that's kind of changing. So investors are becoming more aware of what they're investing in. And I think also that's the direction that we can stimulate this by kind of telling people what they're investing in and making it mandatory to show at least maybe industry a company is active in, or you could think of CO2 labels, for example, in the stock market, not necessarily to say you need to have a portfolio that is under this limit, not at all, just to make investors aware that they're investing in something that emits lots of CO2. Just the awareness. I think that's where it starts. And I think I think we can do a lot of stuff in there, actually.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think we might wanted to ask the same thing. Yesterday evening, we were rounding up our research on this podcast, and we saw your post on switching to a more sustainable bank and what effect it could have on your carbon footprint. It inspired us. So yesterday evening, during our research, we actually decided to switch banks.
Awesome. Can I ask where you were, or do you not want to do that on air?
Oh no, I don't care. I used to be at, or I still am currently at ABN AMRO, and now I'm switching to ASN, or we're both switching to ASN.
Yeah.
I'm aware with the current cases and a lot of pressure that Milieudefensie is putting on ING, ING, that they are, as I can see, the worst. And shortly after come the other traditional banks. So also ABN AMRO is also kind of in there. And I think you were part of Rabobank. Am I correct? Yes.
Literally, because I think when I was younger, it was like the best interest for like a child's bank account, and I just never switched. And then it's maybe you can elaborate a bit, but it makes a big difference for how little effort
definitely
you put into it. What makes that difference?
So it's a very complex thing, but in a way, a bank takes funds from people, so that's your bank account basically, and they provide loans. And what they provide loans to, that varies a lot from bank to bank. So ING doesn't have that much constraints on the projects they are willing to lend to, just as long as the finance things add up, if it makes sense, if it's a risk-free asset, basically. And Triodos or ASN, for example, they're a bit more self-constrained in that sense. So they don't want to contribute to companies or projects that rely too much on fossil fuels, for example. But the amount of money that a bank is allowed to loan is dependent on the amount of deposits they have. It's not a direct one-to-one relationship. Actually, a bank can lend out more than they have as in deposits. So your deposit there is basically used to invest in whatever the bank invests in. And it can be very sustainable. It can also be very non-sustainable. And it can even be invested multiple times, basically. And I think what a lot of people maybe don't realize is there's, of course, the direct impact of that, as in your direct emissions. And that's also what the article is about. It's about just showing how it compares to eating meat or flying or whatever. But you're not just doing that now. You're basically investing in CO2 emissions you're going to make 30 years ahead. So if you're at a bank that's very unsustainable now, you're producing CO2 30 years in the future, basically, because those investments will try to, as long as possible, make their return to make it worthwhile. And I think that's because just of all the financial system, and it's very distant from a lot of people. I think a lot of people don't really know how it works, much to the merit of the financial system itself, because they make everything super complex. But I think that makes it not a thing that you think about when you think about sustainability, whereas I think it's one of the most impactful things actually you can do.
No, it's funny. We were just thinking about that, how often we hear about cutting down on animal products, plastic, flights, and then comparing the impacts, which again, it's a bit of a proxy, but what you named was for every €1,000, I think it was 744 kilos of CO2 emissions, which that's not obviously an exact number, but that's an approximation, which is pretty huge. I mean, rarely hear about it.
Or I think it was €1,344 was equal to like around 1 ton of CO2, which is roughly 1/3 of red meat consumption of the average Dutch person, which I think is incredible because it's such you could say becoming or like eating a meat or just becoming vegetarian or limiting your meat intake, that you could say it's a bit of a lifestyle change, right? But this literally took us 15 minutes to do. So, and it's crazy what the return is on it.
Definitely. No, and that's also a big thing. I think a lot of people think switching banks, a lot of administrative trouble to go through. You only have to say, I want to go to this bank, and they arrange everything from you. Maybe there's 2 things that you need to do manually, but all the rest they arrange for you. But I think that's also a big thing that prevents people from making that step.
So we were thinking, we are part of Team Energy. We obviously we care about the environment, but there are also people that just don't really care. They're maybe just not really exposed to it, or are living from paycheck and have other things on their mind. What would you say to these people, or what arguments would you make to these people? How would you ease into the conversation that they could switch banks or do similar things to change their climate impact or carbon footprint?
Yeah, so in that sense, I think the switching banks one is the most easiest to sell because, as you say, it doesn't influence your lifestyle. If you're already under a lot of stress, it's even harder to change things in your lifestyle because you're just catching up basically. Then I think if you do want to make an impact, then the switching banks is one of the easiest things to do basically.
Just a couple clicks, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. So on your blog, we were seeing that you write from things ranging from how to take care of plants. So I don't know if you maybe have any tips for the
I was already
plants
looking at
standing
them.
here.
They can, there's some room for improvement.
But also, for example, how to declutter your space and sustainable finance. What drives you to write so much and so varied?
Yeah. So I think there's two things that help here. So one is that I really like to understand stuff, and I think that goes for a lot of people in our university. Just the joy of finding out why something works, how something works, it really does something for me. And that's also not limited to a certain topic for me. I don't know if that's different for other people. I just like to find stuff out, whether that's on something very much in my field of research or something very different. I just like to know how stuff works. And in addition to that, I like to write. I would love to write more in the fiction domain, but I never seem to find the time to do that. Maybe after the PhD, when I don't have to do so much writing already, I will explore that option a bit more. But for now, it's just, I guess it's the joy of understanding and maybe sharing as well, just kind of bringing the knowledge across. I just really like it.
That's really nice. And does it also help with, for example, increasing the quality of writing for your PhD? For example, that you write so often.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, the best way to learn is to do it. It goes with anything, and usually in the beginning it's uncomfortable and hard. But yeah, that's how you do it. No, it definitely helps for that. And also the reason I have a lot of posts now is I was doing a 100 kind of day challenge to indeed publish something every day. And I did that specifically because in academia, when you write something, it needs to be perfect. Everything needs to make sense. Everything needs to make the fix together. It needs to be sourced. You need to check everything. A lot of work. And I think a lot of people in our domain, they have a lot of stuff to share. They know a lot. They're very curious about a lot of things, but you don't share a lot because you're in this kind of mindset that everything has to be perfect, everything has to be checked. And with a challenge like this, you're going to produce some garbage. It's going to be there. It's going to happen at some point. Maybe for 10 days you'll manage to put in a lot of hours and really make it work. But that's also fine. The world keeps turning. No one comes in the comments to say how terrible person I am. But it kind of changes the way you think about sharing stuff. Because, as I said, I think in academia, we're kind of forced into this role to make it everything perfect. And then it's very hard to share something, especially if it's a half-developed idea. You don't share that easily, especially not online, where everyone can see it, basically.
That is interesting. I wasn't expecting. That's funny because I had a meeting like a month ago with people from Brainport, Eindhoven, and she mentioned the same thing, that it's a little bit of a frustration she has with the university, that there's so much knowledge and it stays there because the problem isn't the knowledge. The problem is the knowledge transfer. Yeah. And she was actually very positive about things like this, a podcast where we just talk. Which is also this is by nature imperfect and natural. So I think that's good. That's a good direction to go in. I'd say.
And I mean it's just the distinction between your personal life and your professional life. Of course, when I publish something as an author, I cannot just go to a journal and write something and then without any sources, or it doesn't make any sense. That doesn't work. But I think when it kind of translates through in your personal life, where you're just very passionate about stuff and you want to share it, then it's actually counterproductive. And I think there it can help to indeed have some initiatives that kind of promote people to do something else as well, and share their insights and knowledge. Yeah.
That's great. We noticed you write a lot about personal growth as well.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that? What specifically are you interested in? Does it connect to also your studies or sustainable finance?
I would guess so. So yeah, I really like to understand stuff, and
Great trait to have.
definitely. But I especially like to understand stuff that's very hard to understand.
Okay.
And I think the human mind is like the most complex it gets. Maybe quantum physics is out there. I haven't tried. I haven't gone that direction yet. Maybe in the future. But I feel like the human mind is so complex because also from person to person it can be very different. I think that's what also draws me to personal development, and also because the knowledge is useful for yourself as a person as well. I think these two things, they kind of spark that interest. But also in the financial part, I mean, you just heard me talk about what motivates you to invest. So that's like the financial or the non-financial part. That's about motivation. That's also a very personal thing. And I think I'm just naturally drawn to this kind of why people do this or why people don't do that. And I think that's also a lot in the personal development books that I read and summarize. Yeah.
This is pivoting back to your PhD, but your very first post on your blog is about your PhD. I don't know if is it still fully relevant or has it kind of shifted?
No, I mean, so when you do a PhD, 9 months in, you have to submit like a project proposal where you kind of say, this is what I'm going to do. These are the kind of papers I'm going to write. I was actually discussing this yesterday with colleagues, like, why do we have that? Because everyone has a very different PhD in the end from what they have in the proposal. I think the proposal is just to get you from the mindset of looking for what am I going to do, which is what you do in your first year, basically, to actually start to do something, to write something. But that often means that your project proposal is very different from what you actually end up doing. I'm not sure if you read it, because I'm also not quite sure how much it relates to what I just said. I think it's still kind of there.
Well, one thing that was really interesting to me was you mentioned a traditional financial bubble, like something is overvalued and then it pops and it drops down to a real value, and then how fossil fuels kind of has an inverse bubble.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so that's the whole stranded asset issue. So usually 99% of the financial bubbles are, well, we call them normal bubbles because they're 99% of the time, those are the ones. It's when the value of an asset really exceeds what it's actually worth. There's a lot of examples in this also in the rise of the internet, that people are just hyping each other up, saying this is what you need to invest in. I mean, Bitcoin is also a good example, where there's a lot of volatility in the price. It's just people amping up and kind of forgetting what's actually the worth of the underlying asset. And this can continue for a very long time, and it can even be rational to invest in a bubble, because as long as it keeps growing, you can make money there. So that's also a bit of an issue with the financial system. It's perfectly rational to invest in a bubble, which from a system's perspective doesn't make any sense at all, because for the system it's terrible. So you can keep investing in this bubble until it kind of starts to flatten off a little bit. Then you need to be very quick to get out, because then it's going to pop and then the value is going to shoot down. A lot of value is going to be lost, and usually it even overshoots a little bit to the negative. There's a lot of examples of this, and these are often the very big bubbles are the drivers of financial crisis, because if people invested this money with loans, and suddenly all their investments are gone, then they cannot pay off their loans. And then the bank also used these loans to finance some other stuff. That also doesn't work anymore. And then you have a lot of feedback loops and effects. And this is basically also what happened in 2008 with the housing crisis, because a lot of stuff was repackaged as something else and sold again. And you had a lot of these knock-on effects, and that leads to a financial crisis. So that's a normal financial bubble. With, I don't even know how to call it, inverse bubble.
I think inverse, yeah.
Yeah, so with an inverse bubble, the price doesn't rise, the price stays the same, but the value of what's underneath it goes down without people realizing it. And I think that's what happens with the fossil fuels, because at a certain point, we just have other stuff that we use. We have enough wind energy. We don't need to have this oil field work for 30 years, which is what we bought it for. And once that realization catches up, you have the same effect. The price goes down a lot and it overshoots and has all these kind of knock-on effects, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of investments in fossil fuels. So it's very likely that that will also cause a financial crisis because it will have the same kind of effects, the same feedback effects throughout the system. That's the inverse bubble. So there, the value goes down instead of the price goes up.
And then, is that still part of your PhD, or is that now changed?
I mean, it's a part of. Okay. I mention it on the buy that it's that is so that's the risk of climate change maybe on the financial system more. So that's more of the other way around. But it's very relevant still. Yeah.
That's nice. And then again, you mentioned like, why is this happening? Why are all these investors kind of blind to this inverse bubble? Have you found anything about that?
I mean, I think to a large extent it's just culture. Like it's always been this way. It's the same with the housing crisis. Like houses are always the safest investment ever, and then it collapsed. Yeah. I mean, it's exactly the same thing happening over and over again. It's just human psychology. We're used to some things, and we think it will stay that way. That's just how it works.
Okay. So sell your fossil fuels, is what we're saying.
Yeah, if you have them, get out. Get out now.
Get sustainable.
Get something else.
Buy a windmill.
Yes.
Okay, then we're wondering. You've been a very active member of Team Energy for 4 years, if I'm correct.
Yes, that could be true.
We are both very fresh members, so we and maybe also some other people in the audience were wondering, did being a member of Team Energy in any way help you with getting professional connections with, especially in the field that you're currently researching?
I mean, it's hard to say. It's hard to say in hindsight because I just have them now, and I presume that was the logical way of how I got them. Mm-hmm. I don't know about professional connections per se, but I definitely I found kind of a community that I didn't find yet within the university. Maybe that was, I don't know if it's in IS, I think there is more sustainably oriented people. In mechanical engineering, it wasn't that much. I didn't have it that much. And I was really drawn to that. And that's also why I joined the team, I guess, because I really wanted to be part of the community. Not necessarily because I wanted to do one of the commissions, because I did the Energy Now, I think, in my first year. It was super nice. But I was drawn to the team because of the like-minded people. Yeah. And I think that being in such a group kind of reinforced my whole interest with sustainability as a topic. Of course, you hear companies left and right through that community, and maybe in that way you also get the connections. It's kind of hard to say, but I think I'm quite well connected within the domain. I was with Team Energy. Yeah. There is a correlation there. Yeah. If there is causation, cannot say, but yes, I'm sorry, but it definitely helped. I think, yeah, for sure.
Okay. Very nice. And then actually, I'm curious as well, because you're obviously doing your PhD. I know a lot of master students kind of can't wait to just get out and start working. Yeah. We're good? Yeah. Okay.
I was nervous about it.
Yeah, I just realized as well. We have to check.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, sorry.
What made you decide to do a PhD? Because also, I was wondering, does it have to do with the fact that you got 20 citations for your master's thesis? Because that's really impressive.
Yeah, I don't know. Is that?
That's what it said on the.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. You kind of fall into this citation culture, and it's nice to see, but it shouldn't be that way. Also, each time I see it, I'm like, oh yeah, it's nice, but I think that if you do a very radical research paper, you're not going to get citations, even though your work can be very important. Right. Maybe not in the first year, but maybe a few years later. I think citations are not very good. The thing is, the only indicator we have. Yeah. And that's why we use it so much, but it doesn't make any sense because you can do like this bibliometric review, which is just crunching through a lot of papers and making a paper out of that. Those will get cited because you have the overview, but did you contribute that much? I mean, I don't know. Mm-hmm. But that was not your question.
Was what motivated you?
So what motivated me? Actually, I was not going to do a PhD when I graduated. But then I got this opportunity that I could really formulate my own topic. Right. Yeah. And I think that's very important. You need to have the possibility to have a topic that's really something interesting to you, because you're going to be working on it for 4 years. If it's like, then it's not going to work. At a certain point, you're just not going to be motivated enough, and it's going to get back to you. That's why I eventually decided to do a PhD. I think also I did really like the master thesis. So I did really like working on my own project for a long time, from beginning to end, and producing something that's actually meaningful. If you don't like your master thesis already, then I also don't think a PhD is going to suit you well. Of course, it depends a bit on why, because you can also just have a supervisor that doesn't really match with your aspirations. But I think that's always a good indicator of whether it might be something for you.
Okay.
Very nice. Yeah. Then, just from, I would say from the journey of personal growth, and with everything that you've learned through sustainable finance, do you have a final message that you want to communicate with the audience?
Yes. So I thought about this, but you also kind of brought it up already. But I'm still going to use it.
Oh yeah, go.
Because I think it's very important. So, and maybe I can make it a bit broader. So I think the switching banks is a very important thing to do. If you're anywhere concerned with the state of the world, where your money is the world in 30 years from now. So if you want to start making a change anywhere, that's where you should start. Start by switching a bank to something that fits you. I'm not going to say which bank you should switch to, because I shouldn't do that. I just want people to choose a bank that aligns with what they find important. If you are really into fossil fuels and you think it's awesome, then you should switch to ING probably, because that's then the most suitable bank for you. But I think most people nowadays are a bit more concerned with the state of the world as well. See what suits you best, and then make the switch. It's not a lot of work. It seems like a lot of trouble, but it's done in no time, and everything will be arranged for you.
Perfect.
So that was what I was gonna say, but I think you can draw it a bit broader in considering how you spend your money and where you spend it and on what and where it comes from, because unfortunately the world we live in is driven by money. So how you spend that has an influence on how that world is turning in a way. I'm also now thinking about a lot of subscriptions I have there in the United States, which is, I don't know if they already did it, but they're going to get out of the Paris Agreement again. Yeah. That's also something you can do. That also plays a role. Of course, you're a bit less free, because if you want to watch Netflix, then there's not much else to go with. But there's a lot of. I was looking at VPNs, for example. We also have them in Europe, for example, and that's also something you can think about. And it's not it doesn't change that much for you, but if on a collective level, it does mean that more money is going to the EU, which is very forthcoming in its sustainability ambitions, as opposed to a government that really doesn't care about that at all and just wants to make money. I think that's also something you can start to get creative with, how you can make an impact in that way as well.
So just quick, we're gonna close it off with quickly. Let's say, take an example of a VPN, something that's quite inconsequential for the user. Mm-hmm. The US exiting the Paris Agreement, does it mean that companies like, I'll not name one, but let's say an American VPN company, they don't have to oblige to certain CO2 emissions and stuff, or how does it actually?
So for me, it's more in the way, if you buy a VPN there, then your money goes via tax schemes to the government.
Right. Okay,
that's the and if they see a lot of European, well, so I don't think that's going to happen. But if they really see that this is a trend, then a company like that might choose to move its headquarters to Europe, in a very extreme example. Right. And then the government is really in a bit of a pickle, because if a lot of companies start to do that, then there's no tax money anymore coming that way. In that sense, I was thinking about it. Yeah. So just the tax revenues.
So in general, it's just thinking one step further about where you put your money.
Yeah.
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 Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Great. I think
that's a beautiful final message.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Be conscious of where you put your money.
Exactly.
Yeah. And what you do now has a impact that goes further than 30 years.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not just your emissions now, it's your emissions in the future. Yeah.
And it can be done in, switching VPN is 5 minutes at most.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me. Here. Yeah, definitely. It was a pleasure.
All right. For us too. Okay.
Thank you.
Great, thanks.
Yes, dankjewel.
Yes.
Nice.
Ja, super tof.
Echt heel nice, man.
Mooi.
Thanks so much for watching. If you like watching this video, don't forget to like and subscribe.
and hit the bell notification. Really helps to grow the channel. Check out our LinkedIn and Instagram. They're listed in the description below. And we're curious to read your thoughts in the comments. Until next time.